Welcome back to DBC number 5. Today we're talking about the 7th and final section of the 3rd edition of Motivational Interviewing. The 7th section is pretty quick. There's 2 chapters. The first one is about the evolution and research evidence in motivational interviewing. And then the final chapter of the book is about evaluating motivational conversations. So the first chapter, research evidence and the origin, is really cool. You get to learn and hear the origin story of motivational interviewing, how the 2 authors met in Australia, and how motivational interviewing has sort of come out of their clinical practice and it wasn't necessarily taken from any other modality. Really cool to know the origins of how this all started. And as far as the research evidence, there's been over 200 clinical trials, and they found that the effectiveness of motivational interviewing varies with practitioners and different studies and even different sites in the same studies. And we've covered some of the things already that they have found to be most effective for becoming an effective practitioner of motivational interviewing. And the final chapter, Evaluating Motivational Conversations, is this idea of global rating standards. So from like a 1 through a 5, you could read a transcript or listen to a session of motivational interviewing and then grade someone on empathy or reflections from 1 to 5. And the authors state that while this is good, it should only be considered part of an evaluation of someone's proficiency, because let's say that you're a 4 out of 5 on every category or 3 out of 5 on every category. That just tells you where you're at, but it doesn't tell you what to do. This is like saying be more empathetic, which is a global goal, versus a specific goal of use more reflections instead of questions. So that this is, again, the idea we talked about last time of having an on-site coach if you're at an agency, or the idea of reading and going to seminars versus having someone to give you immediate feedback based on actual recordings of sessions that you do. All right, so there's 2 kind of levels that they talk about. There's like a basic competency and then proficiency. So, for example, with complex reflections, again, which are reflections that add to the conversation, that continue the paragraph, to use the author's words. So if someone says, I really struggled with my new eating plan this week, a simple reflection would be just to say back to them what they already told you in different words. Changing your diet plan was really hard for you. Simple reflection. Still reflection, good, but a complex reflection might be, if they say, I really struggled with my new diet plan this week, you might say, you're not sure if you can lose weight by this method. So it's kind of a jump, kind of a guess, and you'll kind of see whether you're correct or not. So the idea of a basic competency would be 40% complex reflections and then 60% or greater, or 60% simple reflections. Or 40% complex, 60% simple. And then proficiency would be at least half complex reflections, if not more. Again, open-ended questions could be like half. They say 50% open-ended, closed-ended questions would be basic competency. And then once you get to 70%, where 7 out of 10 questions are open-ended as opposed to closed, that would be considered proficient at motivational interviewing from that specific metric. And it could be even more. And again, a lot of the examples have closed-ended questions, even in like a great motivational interviewer's work. The final one would be the ratio of reflections to questions. So if we're even 1-to-1, if we're reflecting and asking questions just as often, that would be considered basic competence. And then once you get to the 2-to-1, where you're reflecting, hopefully in a complex manner, at least twice as often as you're asking a question, that would be considered proficient. And then finally, just to wrap up the book, they talk a lot about, and if you search on YouTube, motivational interviewing, you'll see a lot of stuff about, here's the core skills of motivational interviewing as of the 3rd edition of the book, the ORS skills, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, complex or simple, and summaries. And then, you get your 4 processes. We got to like engage, focus, evoke, plan. There's a lot of information on that. And one thing that was only a 9-page chapter at the beginning of the book, this is a 400-page book, and only 9 pages were initially dedicated to the Spirit of Motivational Interviewing, but it keeps coming up again and again in the book. That this is not a set of techniques to use on somebody, but it's a way of having conversations. They really want to focus on the how we are doing it as opposed to the what. The what, the meat and potatoes is the metaphor that I've used, takes up a lot of the book. And there's a certain idea of skill acquisition from when you first begin something, you know nothing about it, to sort of get your training wheels going. But they really want to focus on the how. And the acronym there is PACE. And so P would be that this is a partnership interaction. They use the metaphor of dance. Think about dance partnership, right? As opposed to wrestling is the alternative metaphor that they use. So the idea of a partnership. A would be for acceptance. So that we're accepting them. There's this repeated back to this idea, what they call of the righting reflex, which is like if someone's struggling with whatever and we think it's immoral, like to correct them. No, you should be doing it this way, to prescribe. No. So acceptance of where they're at. C is for compassion, to be compassion, and then this idea of empathetic. That empathy is really putting yourself into their situation, really seeing their perspective. And then E is, of course, for evoking, which I kind of talked at with acceptance, is to evoke their own motivation for change. Because the idea here is that if I give you a reason why you should be motivated to change, or I prescribe you something to do with behavior change, it's not effective, because what happens is that they already have that own idea in their head, and they have the opposite idea of like change or stay the same, change or stay the same. And if we offer them the change talk ourselves, they will offer back sustained talk and give their own reason for remaining the same. And motivational interviewing is not a neutral enterprise. It is oriented toward changing our behavior. So the idea of evoking their own little, they call it the committee inside their own head, evoking the change talk from that, and then proceeding on, which we've talked about.